All right, family, welcome back to our second installment of our Black History Month program uh, here at the African Center for the Study of the United States at Wits University. We are extremely excited about today's guest and his presentation, Dr. Samari Kamara. We want to let you know that Axis is actively supporting and working towards creating and building bridges between the African continent and African Americans, whom we see as a natural constituency. Welcome back to our second installment. And for some reason, I'm hearing myself in the background. Let's see. Bam. All right. Technology, technology, technology. So, that being said, for those who are interested in the work that we are doing, please feel free to support Axis. I will leave a link in the chat, both here on YouTube as well as on in the Zoom chat. Without further ado, we don't want to take much time because we want to get right into this phenomenal presentation. So, Dr. Samari Kamara, PhD, is currently the director and founder of Kamali Academy, an institution dedicated to equipping global parents with curriculum, courses, and resources that empower them to educate their children towards liberation. He is a native New Orleanian, earning his BS from Louisiana State University in 2003 and his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin in 2011. He taught history classes at Dillard University, shout out to my DU, from 2012 to 2015. He then moved to Accra, Ghana, where he started an African Center School, and he was the head men's basketball coach at the University of Ghana for 4 years. Samari's experience, along with his constant study and reflection, makes him a sought-after thought leader in the realm of African-centered education. We don't want to hold this off any longer. Please welcome Dr. Samari Kamara.
Asante Sana, brother. Giabonga Buti. Asawabona to you, Sani Bunani, to all those folks out there. Again, thank you so much for having me on, man. I appreciate you.
And New Orleans style, whoa.
Whoa, what's down? What's down? What's down?
All right, my brother, it is your show.
It's all over? All right, man. So let me go ahead on and figure this piece out quickly. There we go. Bah. There we go. And we can drag that right there. I think we're good. I think we're good. So again, revolutionary love to you all. My name is Baba, Dr. Brother Samori Kamara, director, master learner, and guide at Kamali Academy. Today, we're going to be talking about curriculum as a cultural battlefield. And in talking about a curriculum as a cultural battlefield, we're going to be talking about the rise of Black Studies movement here in the United States of America. And we're going to be talking about the Soweto uprising of 1976. And we're going to connect all of that as well to the rise of African-centered schools here in America, right? And so we want to get right on into it. If the curriculum is a cultural battlefield, we have to ask ourselves, who's fighting, right? What are they fighting for? What tactics are they using? And this is a fight that we have always fought, and a battle that must be done and must be won for the minds of our African people, of our African children, right? The curriculum is a reflection of the cultural battles over which whose knowledge is valued and whose narratives will be told. Today, we stand at the crossroads of our history and education, examining how this battlefield is a quest for dignity, identity, and empowerment, right? So like I said, we're dealing with the Soweto uprising, we're dealing with Black Studies movement, and we're dealing with the development of African-centered schools. And each movement leveraging that education, that battle for education, for identity, cultural identity, and the ability to reshape the future in our image, right? And we look at the word curriculum. What is the etymological origin of the word curriculum? Curriculum comes from the Latin, which means like a race course, like a course, right? And it resonates with these movements because we're talking about each of these movements being a leg on that course. leading us to cultural representation, leading us towards self-determination. Where is the curriculum leading us now? I guess that's a rhetorical question. Think about the curriculum. Where does it lead African people? Think about the curriculum. We talk about the curriculum in traditional Africa. We'll talk about the curriculum during enslavement for African people, and after the war, as well as Civil War, and during Reconstruction time. What was that curriculum like? Right? Whose stories were being told? Whose values were being transmitted? Right? Were we getting a real education, an education for liberation, or were we getting an education for subordination? So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the origins of the Soweto movement. What kind of education was happening in apartheid South Africa? What kind of education was happening in the universities and schools in America in the 1940s and the 50s and the 60s that made college students want to fight for a different kind of education? And of course, we'll deal with the African-centered schools. Let's move on right on into it. So before we move to today and to those movements that we'll be talking about, we have to look at traditional African education. Right. And that education was about fortifying community and our values. Right. That education, particularly in South Africa. Now, people will say Africa is huge. There's 54 poor countries in Africa. You can't just make, broad statements about Africa. But if you look at traditional African culture all throughout the continent, we'll see an underlying similarities between the peoples, the cultures, the ethnic groups. Right. So number one, that education, that traditional education was community based. Right. It was provided for by the elders and the families. We did not send our children to strangers in order to get education. And we have our young brother here. Go ahead. Get out of here, man. You got my son. You got my son here. Keita Lamumba, Monterey, Kamara coming in here, busting in. But the education was a community-based education with the elders and the families. And now we send our children to strangers, people who we don't know, people whose values we don't understand, people whose values a lot of times we don't agree with. We send our children there to be educated. That wasn't the way it was in traditional African education. We also have an educational system that was really about the oral tradition. It would pass on these proverbs, these fables, right? And I don't know about you, but I love African proverbs. I've been studying African proverbs since I was a ninth grader. One of my teachers, he understood that I was getting into poetry. He understood that I was getting to enjoy African culture in many ways. So he just slipped a little African proverb book to me and said, check these out. So in high school, I was one of those guys who, whenever they had a situation, I was the one who had an African proverb right on the tip of my tongue. And I was wise beyond our years. So in traditional African culture, we taught with the African proverb. One of my favorite African proverbs is a plant, no matter how healthy, can survive in contaminated soil. A plant, no matter how healthy, can survive in contaminated soil. So our children have been planted today, have been planted before in other people's schools, in colonial schools, right, in contaminated soil. So it stunted the growth of our young warriors. So we have the oral tradition, the proverbs and the fables, the teachable moments that would happen. But also the education was holistic in nature. Life was the classroom. As a matter of fact, you got two kinds of education, really. You got an education for life and you got an education for living. And so the education for life was that morals, those values. The education for living was about the skills that you learned. It wasn't in necessarily a classroom, even though we know in ancient Kemet and other places, there were schools for scribes and all that kind of stuff. But the education in traditional Africa was really about the skills in which you learn to be a valuable citizen in your own community, right? Are we learning those same kind of skills today? And another element of a traditional African education was the rites of passage. The rite of passage, in terms of a boy moving into manhood or a girl moving into womanhood, was the kind of education I think we even need today. It's an education that taught you how to be a man in your community, taught you what it meant to be a man, and for women also it taught the young girls what it means to be a woman in their community. So in some instances, a boy was told to go and wrestle a lion with his bare hands, or to rustle some cattle from another group. But why? Why would they do that? Right? Because they wanted men who will be able to look fear in the face and not run. Right? To look danger in the face and not run, because those men had to be the warriors for their community. Those men had to be the people who would stand up if somebody came at night and raided their community. They would have to be able to fight. If you couldn't fight, then you were not useful in many ways, right? And we know the education of young women was how to be a good wife, how to take care of a homestead, how to teach the young warriors, about the values and the cultures of the community, right? And I think the rites of passage that was in Africa of old, or traditional Africa, which has been disrupted by some of the Eurocentric education that goes on there now. I think we should be bringing it back. I think every school, every African center school, every school should have classes on what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, how to pick the right kind of partner to live your life with, right? Because the fall of the family, the fall of the community, the fall of the nation begins in the homes of its people, right? That's an African proverb. Let's move on. Let's look at the education. Let's look at the education before or during and after the Civil War, right? So we're talking about reclaiming the African mind. We know that during the enslavement period here in the United States of America, the education was a lot of times null and void for African people unless they start it for themselves. And when they start that education for themselves, when they start to learn how to read, if they were caught, they will be beaten. If they were caught, maybe they will be sold. If they were caught, sometimes they will be killed. But they had the fervent desire to pursue literacy and education because they understood that it was about empowerment. And if somebody was trying to keep it from you, it must have been a good thing. So they always wanted to get it. Pictured here are some self-emancipated Africans who are behind Union lines during the Civil War, right? And it's immediately they began to hold classes openly. These were the same classes that were held secretly in the bush, right, away from the cabins, away from the plantations, so that our people can get an education. It doesn't matter if you were 3 or you were 73. Our African ancestors during this time were trying to get an education, right? So after the Civil War, when other people came down, when other philanthropic organizations came down, when Northerners came down, what they realized was that African people had already started their schools. African people had already started to provide funding for themselves, supplies. They began to hire teachers to provide education for their children, pooling their resources together, secured land to educate their people. And the reason why they were educating their people was different from the Freedmen's Bureau, who would come down later, was different from the Northern whites, who would come down later, who were trying to educate them, again, to stay in their place. All right. You kind of get this kind of education. You're going to read, you're going to do this kind of thing. But remember, you can't rise no higher than, so don't play yourself and think that just because you get an education, it's going to change your social status in our society. But African people, African American communities, right? They want an education that will give them everything they needed to provide for themselves. See John D. Anderson's The Education of Blacks in the South for more information about the kind of education African people were giving themselves after the Civil War, right? But you also have Jim Crow. Jim Crow would rise in the South after Reconstruction, and African American people had to negotiate and navigate, delicate balance between accommodating certain societal expectations, because people would still want to know what you're trying to teach, right? And also resisting that racial subjugation. And I think our African ancestors did a beautiful job of that, and they set the foundation of the colleges and universities, the HBCUs, the historically Black colleges and universities that we have today. All right, so let's get right on into this thing. We're going to deal with first the origins of the Black Studies movement. Pictured here is Howard University, right? In 1968, the students are occupying administrative building to get more courses on our own experience. This is a Black school. Howard is a HBCU, and they wanted a revised student discipline policy, right? But the origin of the Black Studies movement, it comes right out of the freedom schools during the civil rights movement. When Northerners and other activists converged on the South, they not only wanted to help people get the right to vote, they wanted to help people get their civil rights and all that kind of stuff. But they also said we have to teach, we have to educate not only the older people but the younger people, because the kind of education that we're getting again was a miseducation, right? An education that talked negatively about African people, that spoke negatively about African culture, and really, if it spoke about African culture at all, it just wasn't good. So those freedom schools came in, right? And one scholar said that the road from study to action was short for these folks during that time, because as soon as they began to get a little bit of education, a little bit of literacy, they began to attend the mass meetings. They began to participate in the boycotts. They began to canvass and volunteer during voter registration drives, right? But they also understood at that time that those kind of schools, those freedom schools, were supplemental. They were not going to be a replacement for the schools that they already had in the South or around the country, right? Some of the other origins, of course, is the sit-in movement. You were college students, student-led people sitting in at lunch counters, trying to be able to just eat, and not have to go to the back door, right? You also have the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968, right? It led to a massive enrollment of Black students in institutions of higher education, right? At the beginning of the 1960s, there were more than 200,000 Black students enrolled in higher education. At the end of the 1960s, more than 1 million were there. Many of them were the first college student in their family. Right? You also had the urban rebellions, right, that followed King's assassination. You have the Watts riot, in 65. You have all these things that are galvanizing the young people to want to do something different, right? To value who they were, right? We also have Black activism going on in high schools. We got Forsyth High School in New Orleans, who battled for Black studies, and other places in New York and Chicago. Black students were saying we need something more. We need a Black student union. We need an Africana studies program, Black studies program. We need these things. But one of the major catalysts for this movement for Black studies was Baba El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, or Malcolm X, right? Malcolm X, he created a new normal for the Black orientation towards social change. Malcolm was the symbol of the new drive for education. And when he spoke, the young people listened. So, you can go back and you look at Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael, who talks about when he saw Malcolm at Howard University speaking and debating against other people, it changed the way he looked at the world, right? Malcolm believed that Black students were the ones to bring radical change to their universities and to the United States at home, right? He called for college students to launch their own independent studies, right? To study the race problem, right? So that they can devise, a program geared to their thinking, our thinking as African people, right? And he viewed the young people as the vanguard of a revolutionary force, right? This is what Malcolm is talking about. And for me, we built Kamali Academy in 2009. We started it with only 2 students at my kitchen table. Right now, we've helped over the years thousands of students get an African-centered education and education for liberation. And one of the reasons why I started Kamali Academy is because I understood that if we can allow our young warriors to keep their righteous African mind for as long as possible, maybe they will come up with the solutions that we need to solve our problems. This is the origins of the Black Studies movement. Let's get into 2 examples of the Black Studies movement. Here we go. We have San Francisco State in 1968. Does that rhyme? That kind of rhymes, though. San Francisco State in 1968. So the students at San Francisco State, right, they had a Black student union, and they got together with some other ethnic groups and started something called the Third World Liberation Front, right? They had demands that were rooted in a desire for an education that acknowledged and then centered their experiences, their histories, and their contributions, right? And so they were organizing and debating and going back and forth and negotiating with the administration, right? But things weren't moving very fast. And so, but one incident is a thing that really took it to the next level. So one of the prominent organizers on campus at San Francisco State at the time was a guy named George Murray. He was a popular graduate student and he taught freshman English, right? Murray had a second job as the Minister of Education of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. If you don't know who the Black Panther Party was, go check them out. Started by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, right? He was fiercely anti-Vietnam, and his politics got him suspended from campus in 1968. That was the thing that started off a riot not a riot, a strike at San Francisco State in 1968. This strike would last for 133 days. 133 days. One of the students said, listen, the norm of the day was white supremacy, right? He said, we wanted to find out, right, and be educated about ourselves. And he said that if we could not get that, then nobody would be educated at all. Nobody would get any education, right? So this is a 5-month strike, which led to frequent and violent police standoffs, and it was the longest strike of its kind in U.S. history. So this is San Francisco State in 1968, right? So some of the demands they had, they had the establishment of the Black Studies program, right? That's what they want. They wanted a program that will focus on African American history, culture, and contributions, right? Which was largely absent or misrepresented in the existing curriculum or Eurocentric curriculum, right? They wanted a bachelor's degree that was granted within that new Black Studies program, right? They also wanted autonomy in hiring. They wanted 20 full-time teaching positions, and they wanted to be able to hire that faculty, insisting that the professors could be chosen. The only professors who could be chosen were those who authentically represented and taught the African American experience. Let me ask you a question about, right? Should a white person be allowed to teach Black studies? And if they are, would that be better than an authentically representative of the African race or African American to teach that class? They also wanted admissions and support for Black students. They called for their university to admit more African students, more Black students, and provide them with the necessary financial and academic and social support to succeed. They also wanted a relevant curriculum. We talk about that curriculum again, right? The curriculum comes from the Latin as a race course. Where is it leading us, right? So they want a relevant curriculum that would be directly beneficial for the Black community, reflecting its needs, its challenges, and aspirations, right? So this strike that happened, I mean, you had sit-ins, you had protests, classes were shut down, right? You had clashes with the police, right? And you had a significant amount of media attention that came from, around the world, really, with the students and what they were doing. Okay, let's move on. Here's an aftermath. So this is just one of the police clashes that happened, right? But after you clash with the police, you clash with the administration, and you have this 133-day strike, right? It ends March 20th, 1969. The administration, responds to the students' demands. They established the College of Ethnic Studies, right? And within that College of Ethnic Studies, you have your Black Studies program, right? And the administration also agreed to accept virtually all of the students of color for the fall of 1969, right? It had a national impact. The success of this strike and the establishment of the Black Studies program at San Francisco State in 1969 inspired similar programs, similar departments across the country. It fundamentally changed the landscape of Black higher education. Dr. Nathan Hare said that if we're going to have this, if we're going to have a Black Studies, it's going to mean nothing if that Black Studies program is not cultural, nationalistic, and revolutionary in aim. Okay, let's move on here. All right. So again, they wanted more students to be admitted, and of course, it inspired students to fight for Black studies across the country. Here's another example of the fight for Black studies. This is at Cornell. Cornell, that's Cornell, Cornell University in 1969, from April 18th through the 20th. Okay. So these guys, this was a highly publicized event during this time. I mean, you see the picture here, brothers coming out of the building with guns, fists raised, right? After months of negotiation and escalating tensions, the Black students occupied, a building on campus, the University Student Union building, as a form of protest. The occupation was a response to the inaction by the university administration regarding demands and there was a recent cross burning. They had a cross burning on campus that was right in front of the housing for Black women students, right? So the brothers said, all right, we're not taking this anymore, right? Early in the morning on Parents' Weekend, this Parents' Weekend, right? 11 fire alarms were set across the campus, and the students took over the building, said, get out. Y'all got to get out of here. We're taking over this thing. This is our building now. And we're gonna occupy it until our demands are met. Right. So one of the students at the time, women were a big part of this. Women were a big part of this. Right. But a lot of women at the time felt like we wanted to put our men forward and try to give them a respect that the white society weren't giving them at that time. But this sister, who was a part of it, said, despite the university's motto of any person and any study, she resented the lack of courses focused on her history and her culture. Right. So as soon as the occupation starts, this white fraternity group begins, sees what's going on, and they storm the student union, right, to try to end the battle. But they were beaten back. Right. The brothers came through, said, nah, get up out of here. We're not going to end our strike. We're not going to end our occupation because of what you're talking about. But because of that, they began to smuggle in the guns, because they said, if they come back, they're going to be dealt with. If the police come, they're going to be dealt with, right? Because the mentality was, we were prepared for anything, they said, right? They said they were so committed, and that they felt that do I have to die for this? And if I do, then maybe that's okay. Maybe I will die for this. But this is, again, about the curriculum as a cultural battlefield. We understand that it's important that we learn about who we are and where we come from, right? We have Malcolm X, who said that, listen, if you're not ready to die for it, take the word freedom out of your vocabulary. Again, Malcolm was one of the biggest catalysts for the students changing their mindset and going in a different way. Okay. The movement posited that curriculum is not just content to be learned, but as a means for liberation, empowering students with knowledge of their heritage, fostering a sense of pride, and cultivating a critical consciousness towards social injustices. Bob and Malcolm put that spark into these students, and they lit the fire and kept it going. So at the end of the situation, you see this picture here. These are the kind of, you see, we got welcome parents back there. The situation escalated, right? They felt threatened. So of course, like I said, they bought the guns in, they armed themselves, right? And this picture here was widely circulated throughout the media at the time. If you saw this, what would you think? Right? You see brothers coming out of this white university with their guns drawn. I mean, would you join a movement if you saw this kind of stuff? Right?
It definitely made me smile.
Definitely, man. Definitely. It's they chose a good time to do it, right? And so in the aftermath of this situation, Cornell would start an Africana studies program. And Africana studies is a multidisciplinary analysis of the lives and thoughts of people of African ancestry on the African continent and throughout the world, and embraces Africa, Afro-America, and the Caribbean, but does not confine itself to those three geographical areas, right? And so the Africana, so it's not just Black studies, we're going to say it's Africana, because where's the Black land? Some people would say, right? We keep it moving. Now let's deal with something that's probably close to heart for a lot of the viewers: apartheid in South Africa. And you know a lot more about apartheid in South Africa than I do, I'm sure. Right? Let's deal with, this is a system in South Africa of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination enforced by the National Party government from 1948 to 1994. This policy was designed to maintain white dominance in all aspects of society, suppress the rights and freedoms of the non-white population. Apartheid has its roots in early colonial practices of racial policies, but it was formalized and systematized to an unprecedented degree after National Party's electoral victory in 1948. So let's deal with some of the elements of apartheid system. You have the population classification, right? You have the Population Registration Act of 1950, classified South Africans into racial groups: white, black, colored, and of course Indian, right? And it determined individuals' access to rights, resources, and opportunities. We keep it moving. The homeland, or geographical segregation here. The Group Areas Act of 1950 assigned racial groups to different residential and business sections in urban areas, leading to forced removals of non-white South Africans from their homes to segregated neighborhoods, right? We have the pass laws as well. The pass laws, existed in various forms before, but it required Black South Africans to carry passbooks to enter and remain in quote unquote white areas, and severely restricted their movement. I think we got that kind of thing here in America as well, right? And then we have the limited educational and employment opportunities, right? The Bantu Education Act of 1953 and other laws institutionalized educational segregation and occupational segregation, ensuring that non-white South Africans receive an inferior education and limited job opportunities. Let's get into how this thing started with the Soweto uprising. As I just said, the Bantu Education Act of 1953, right? The guy who was the architect of this act, he said that the natives, the blacks, must be taught from an early age that equality with Europeans is not for them. That sounds like the South in the United States of America, right? That sounds like America, not the South. Anything south of Canada is South, Malcolm said, right? He said there is no place for the African in the European community above the level of certain forms of labor. It is of no avail for him to receive a training which has as its aim the absorption in the European community. What do you think about that? I thought growing up in New Orleans is a tourist economy, right? I felt like we were being educated to only be servants within the tourist economy in New Orleans. I was like, New Orleans doesn't need a whole bunch of Black doctors and lawyers, right? They need cooks, right? They need entertainers. They need the people to be downtown to do tours or something. It wasn't about an education for real liberation that would take us beyond those borders of New Orleans, right? You also had overcrowded classrooms. Sometimes it was as high as 58 students to one teacher, right? And you also had, of course, underqualified teachers who did not a lot of times finish even their quote unquote high school level, right? And then you had this Bantu Education Act, and you have the medium decree also that says that English and Afrikaans should be taught about 50-50, right? So if I don't speak, fluent English and I don't speak, fluent Afrikaans, how am I going to teach it, right? We talk about also resources, the resources that were allocated for white students in South Africa at that time was rand. It was like 644 rand, which is about $33 today, right? Per year. And for the Black student, it was a lot less. It was 42 rand, which is about $2 today, right? And so you have a situation where You got overcrowded classrooms, the teachers, and no resources going on before you have the Soweto uprising. Of course, you have a lot more as well. But the heart of it was the Afrikaans Medium Decree, which sought to impose Afrikaans as the primary language of instruction. This was seen as cultural imperialism. This was seen as trying to erase African identity and reinforcing apartheid. This was made compulsory in 1974. Let's move on. And of course, we know who this guy is, Stephen Bantu Biko, who said the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressor. It's not a gun, not a bomb. Again, we're on the battlefield, curriculum as a cultural battlefield. Biko said, and he said this in 1971 or 1972, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Who controls the education now? Right? Who controls the education of our children now? Is it the oppressor or is it us? Do we control it? Right? Let's move on. So we have the Soweto uprising, June 16, 1967. On June 16, 1967, between 3,000 and 20,000 students, some reports say, mobilized and marched peacefully to demonstrate, right, and protest against this government directive, right? The march was meant to culminate at a rally at Orlando Stadium, okay? The uprising was led by high school students. The uprising was a demonstration of the youth mobilization against a systemic injustice, their bravery in facing this brutal state repression, galvanizing international support against apartheid, right? So when the students are marching, that morning, the police fire live rounds and tear gas into the crowd of students. Eventually, it'll be over 200 students who were murdered that day by the police, right? It's tough. I mean, if you go back, you see the picture, the famous picture of Hector Peterson, being carried away from the melee by a brother, and you see the sister with her hands up. It's a hard scene to watch. I didn't want to put that picture here, right? You can go and look up the Soweto uprising if you don't know about it, right? But that uprising, that bravery from the students galvanized and spread across the country and across the world, right? It showed that the system of apartheid was horrible. It was brutal, right? So international pressure increased. Militant groups who were banned in South Africa got new recruits, right? Because we see we are not going to be able to peacefully do anything with these people. We need to fight back, right? It underscored the protest, though, underscored the curriculum as a site of resistance, where the imposition of language and history served as tools of domination for their people. And the fight for educational autonomy became synonymous with a struggle for national liberation, and it was led by the students. These colonial powers often sought to suppress or eradicate indigenous languages, right? We'll look at what's his brother's name here? Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He talks about how the oppressor would use the language to erase, of course, our history, our identities. He said, listen, if we can change their names, if we take their names, we can take their language, we can control them, right? So he says here, language, any language has a dual character in it. It is both a means of communication and a carrier of culture, right? And so if we're not using our own languages, if we don't know our languages, but we know other people's languages, right? And Ngugi says that is enslavement. That is enslavement, right? Culture. One of the reasons why I'm learning isiZulu, Giafundi isiZulu, is because that the language has such a beautiful philosophy behind it. So if I say Sawubona, that means literally we see you. We see you. Who is the we that sees you? That's a beautiful idea to bring to a language, the philosophy behind the language. Okay, let's see here. We have colonial powers impose languages to strike at the thing that bound communities and to control memory. Okay, again, the last one here. What is the difference between a politician who says that Africa cannot do without imperialism, and a writer who says Africa cannot do without European languages. Do we value our languages? And speaking about isiZulu, I've been trying to find books written in isiZulu so I can practice the language. There are not many books there. I can't even find a long walk to history, a long walk to freedom, sorry, from Nelson Mandela in isiZulu. If y'all know where I can find it, please let me know in the comments. I would love to read that, to practice my isiZulu, because I'm learning the language. We should all have at least one African tongue. All right, let's move on. I know we don't have much time, Baba. All right, if you had to build a school curriculum from scratch, what would it include? What would it include? What would be the text, the canonical text that you feel like every child should read? Do you have tests? What kind of tests would they be? Right? What will be the medium of instruction? What language? Do you give grades? Who would be the teachers? Think about that. If you had to build a school curriculum from scratch, what would it include? And as you think about your ideal version of that, think about what's going on in the schools today. And I understand that there was a movement in 2015 where students were protesting still about the curriculum, also about tuition rates and all that kind of stuff in South Africa. Let's move on. The rise of African-centered schools, Bob, and I'll do this one quickly, and we'll keep moving. Bob Moses, who was a SNCC leader in 1964, he identified some nationalist principles when he started talking about parallel institutions. So instead of what he was doing, they were doing the freedom schools. They were trying to teach the people, trying to help them gain literacy, gain a better understanding of self, and also help people to vote. But he said, why can't we set up our own schools? He asked in one of the meetings, right? Because when you come right down to it, why integrate in their schools? What is it that we will learn in their schools? And will we benefit from what we learn in their schools? You have the upheavals that were going on the college campuses. We talked about Cornell. We talked about San Francisco State. We talked about the high school students who were doing major demonstrations across the world, across the country, in Philadelphia and Boston, of course, New Orleans. We have the youngsters who were launching boycotts, right? Who are leaving schools, who are rallying for inclusion with public schools, for Black history, right? But you have these people who said, listen, we're not going to try to change them. Let's build our own. And our curriculum at an African-centered school is going to start with the question, what kind of Africans do we need to solve the kind of problems we have? And if we're not being educated to solve our problems, then we're being miseducated, right? Let's move on. Those African-centered schools were about re-Africanization, about the rediscovery, the redefinition, and the revitalization of our story, not his story, our story, and our ancestral traditions and customs. We see here we have the Sankofa bird. Sankofa is a Adinkra symbol. It's a concept that comes from the Akan in Ghana, West Africa, right? And it means to go back and fetch it, to go back to our past and fetch the good things from our past and bring it forward into the present so that we can be better for ourselves and our communities into the future. Sankofa helps us to remember so that we can remember ourselves, bring ourselves back together, right? This re-Africanization is a supreme act of intellectual disobedience. It's the preventative and the cure for cultural misorientation and menticide, and is the answer to Africa's identity confusion. And this comes from Ajay Akoto in a book called The Sankofa Movement, right? So in these African-centered schools, they will study our story. They will read our classics. So we don't have to read, it's out with Shakespeare, it's in with Zora Neale Hurston, right? It's out with Napoleon, in with Shaka Zulu. We're learning our languages, isiZulu. We're learning Tree. We're learning Kiswahili and others. We're adopting our names, our hairstyles, our clothing. We're practicing our spirituality. We're celebrating our history and our holidays. There's no Columbus Day in African-centered school, right? But we will celebrate Nat Turner. We will celebrate Malcolm. We will celebrate Fannie Lou Hamer. We will celebrate Winnie Mandela. We will celebrate Yaa Santara. We will celebrate those folks who did great things for African people. In that African-centered school, and it's a beautiful African proverb as well, right? It says, you don't cut the child to fit the cloth. You cut the cloth to fit the child. Listen, hear that again. You don't cut the child to fit the cloth. You cut the cloth to fit the child. You tailor the education. You give them choice. right? There's an African proverb that also says, if you want to know how fast a child can go, send them where they want to go. Don't cut the child to fit the cloth, cut the cloth to fit the child, right? But we know in the Eurocentric schools, they do the opposite. And you think about this idea. There was a guy named Procrustes, right? He was a character out of the ancient Greek tales. Procrustes played a host with a twisted sense of welcome. He lured travelers in. He promised a perfect rest on his iron bed, claiming that it was a one size fits all situation. But here's the catch: if you did not fit his so-called perfect bed, then he'd stretch you out, or he'd chop off parts of you to make you fit. That's right. He would mutilate you to fit into that bed. But he would mutilate you to fit into that bed, not the bed to fit you. Right? This is the Procrustean bed, a symbol of the cruel, inflexible system that forces everyone to fit into the same mold, ignoring their unique needs, their unique learning habits, their distinct histories, and their personal truths. An African-centered curriculum will do the exact opposite of that. It tailors to us. It centers African people, right? It shows us who we were, who we are, and where we can go in the future, right? So these movements, the Soweto movement, the Black Studies movement, the rise of African-centered schools here in America and other places, these movements gets us away from that Procrustean system, right? Away from the Eurocentric curriculum, and gives us the kind of curriculum that we need for ourselves. It is a battlefield that we have been fighting, right? We've been fighting on for a long time. The battle is not over, right? Whose side are you on? Thank you so much, brother.
Man, thank you, brother. That was an absolutely phenomenal presentation. And I don't know if you got the chat and the message. I said, man, take your time and loving you on YouTube. So here's what I want to do. I want to go through a few of the YouTube comments, and I see we have Dr. Judy Rashid here. I want to go through a few of the YouTube comments, get your reaction to them. It's not many questions, but it's a lot of comments. Then I have a few questions, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
So the one of the lady 1103 on YouTube says sometimes, and I believe she might be a South African sister. She says sometimes I feel like we are in some kind of simulation because these events can't be so similar. Speaking of the history of South Africa and African Americans, Rodman says similar to our struggle here in the States. Art says, I will never forget as a child that my father told me that the greatest fear to white supremacy is an educated Black man. And I think some of them are scared right now. What you on here, Brother Baba? Matthew Johnson said bars. When you made that little rhyme, he said bars.
Right.
All right.
It's definitely the similarities are crazy, man. When you start getting into our story, particularly with quote unquote African Americans or Africans here in America and South Africa, there's so many similarities and parallels that we should be on the same team right now and forever, for sure. The same devil, different hells.
Absolutely. And as an African American living in South Africa, I can tell you that the similarities run far beyond kind of any surface level. It's really deep, as outcasted members of a racialized society, both South Africans being in a racialized society, African Americans being in a racialized society, and being at the bottom of that caste. We have so many similarities in the way we view the world and the way the world experiences us, which is truly quite amazing. I think just to carry that over is that I think a lot of our African Americans must learn more about the continent, must be reaching out more to the continent, because here you're mentioning Brother Malcolm, you're mentioning Brother Huey. They're familiar with the names. They're familiar with our history. It's us who are lacking in many ways in understanding the similarities of the struggle. But I have a few questions I want to jump into. So curriculum as a cultural battleground. But my question is this: how can an oppressed people, particularly those who are who are a minority group in the United States, African Americans. How can we create an educational system and change that paradigm on a mass scale? It's we have Kamali Academy, and whenever Dr. Umar finishes his school, right? But how can
Right.
how can we do it on a
On the
mass scale?
mass. So I think one of the issues that we'll face is that we would want to do it on a mass scale immediately, and it's not possible because we have so many folks who have been miseducated for so long. They don't want anything to do with what we're talking about. They believe that this world is a white man's world, and we got to get it how we live, and we should be going to their schools. We should be getting their validation. We should be getting their confirmation, right? And so that's going to be difficult. But I think what we start with the liberated minds. We start with the Kamali academies. We start with the Sankofas and the different schools that we have around, and we view it, brother, as those maroon camps, right? Everybody didn't run away from the enslavement and the plantation, but you did have some people who did run away to the bush, right? Who walked into the bush with a knife and said that I don't know what's going to happen, I don't know where I'm going to eat, but any place is better than the plantation where I just came from. So you have families that will leave the public food system, the private food system, and they'll go into these African center schools, and we'll steal some teachers. We'll siphon off some more students, and as we go, we'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. But it only takes a committed few to really get this thing started and take it to the next level. And our people want to know it can be done before they'll do it. We have to show our people that we can get a serious education that is valuable not only to us individually, but for our community as well before they would jump on board. We just need more people to take that chance and get up out of it.
All right, so now this one is I'm going to leave it as open-ended as possible. And Dr. Rashid,
Yes, sir.
we see your comments. If you give you one moment, we'll let you jump in. Um, so early on, you mentioned that there was a life education and a living education, and that the life
Yes.
education, okay, right. So and mainly this was coming through an oral tradition, right? Now I'm
Mm-hmm.
just going to say 5 words to you. The classroom of hip hop. How has that
Okay.
oral tradition and that life education impacted us both? Yeah, I'll leave it there.
So when you talk about the classroom of hip hop and its effect on African people, it depends on what area you're talking about, right? What era you're talking about. Because if you're talking about the late 80s, the early 90s, and during that time when hip hop was a lot different in many ways. It was about, the divestment, in South Africa. It was about wearing, certain garb and talking about certain issues and trying to raise the consciousness of African people. Then that era of hip hop, that classroom of hip hop was a beautiful thing. And I know many brothers and sisters who came up listening to that kind of music and became much more aware about who they are as African people and our culture. But if you look at the music as a whole today, the music that goes platinum, the music that is played on the radio for our children to hear and imbibe and listen to and be educated by, that music on the whole is not very positive. That curriculum is leading us to death if we're looking at it, as the classroom of hip hop. I used to like to ask my students different questions, and so many of my students would answer me with hip hop lyrics, right? And so I would ask young warriors, hey, how many of you would want to be married? And not many of them would raise their hand. And so I called on one young brother. I said, man, why don't you want to be married when you get older, brother? And he started singing a song, She Ain't Gonna Tie Me Down, and just went and sung the whole verse, from this song. I'm like, that's where you're getting your information about, relationships from the music. And that classroom of hip hop is leading to death in our community. And now it's not in many ways the artist's fault because we know who controls the music, right? You won't hear white death on the radio. You won't hear white rape on the radio. You won't hear, certain things. You won't hear a whole bunch of drug use and all this kind of stuff on the radio coming from other people. But from us, right? They'll put anything on the radio, anything negative on the radio, because you can't say certain positive things, on the radio for Black people, but you can say every negative thing under the sun, and you'll be applauded and rewarded handsomely by this particular society.
Absolutely. Dr. Julie, did you want to jump in here? I believe you're on mute.
Good. Yes. Greetings. How are you?
We're well. We're well.
Greetings.
Good. I just jumped in. I got this link from a WhatsApp group that I'm a part of, and I decided to click in, and I don't regret it at all. I'm very impressed with the information and the passion, and continuing the legacy. I am a student of the 60s and the 70s, and all that you speak of, Dr. Kamara, I was all in, all ears, because as a teenager and then as a college student. I'm now 71 and I'm retired from university life, but I'm still very much connected with the Knowledge Society. So I'm all smiles. I'm all in. My prayers is that you, the good brother who just talked about the posed the question about hip hop. I didn't get his name, but I my prayers is that you all will stay inspired, continue to carry on, because freedom is not short lived. It is a continuous struggle, and it's a glorious one. It's tedious, but I just want to be a word of encouragement this morning. I appreciate both of you. I appreciate everyone that is involved in this work. You are the answer to my grandson's prayers.
Yeah, Bonga Mama, thank you so much. Asante Sana.
Thank you.
We will continue to work for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you for those words. I wanted to jump into another question here. So I'm going to hold up this book. I don't know if people can see it. It is From Ivory Towers to Ebony Towers. Now, this takes a little bit of a different approach, because instead of creating African-centered schools, it's a collection of essays on how to decolonize education. So what is your response to that? To say that, we're in the United States, or we're here in South Africa, this system has already been kind of established. We don't necessarily have to create a new one. We just need to repair what is broken in this current system.
Yeah, I think you have that kind of sentiment, you have that kind of attitude here in the United States of America as well. But I'm going to be on the other side. I'm going to be on the other side that, for me, that's like saying, all right, yeah, we're in a prison and it's bad, but let's just reform the prison. Let's get curtains in the prison, in a cell. Let's get a new rug, some new furniture within the plantation, and then we'll be all right. So let's get a little bit more recognition within the system, and then everything will be okay. I am of the opinion, and I am fighting for a total dismantling of the system as it is, because it is not working for African people. Now, do we need some people within the system to work, to be there, to galvanize the minds and help young people? I would not be who I am today if it wasn't for Bakia Tayehimbe, who's a substitute teacher at Etna Carr High School when I was in 9th grade, who introduced me to Malcolm and who told me that education is not being about being white, but education is about being a liberator for your people, right? And you can speak quote unquote proper English and continue to do that. I would not be who I am today if it wasn't for Dr. Leonard Moore, who's now at University of Texas at Austin, who saw something in me that I did not see in myself. I would not be the person I am. So I understand the need to deal with the ivory tower and change it to an ebony tower if we can. But I also know that we need to build our own on the outside. And we cannot give, brother, 95% of our effort to other people's institutions and only 5% of our effort to our institution, our businesses or whatever, and think it's going to grow and thrive like it should. So I'm saying we need more people to give more effort to building our own, as Marcus Garvey would have done, right? The system changes you. You can't go into I'm gonna be the president of the United States of America. You think you're gonna turn the White House into an ebony house, even though it was built by African hands? You think you're going to turn that White House into an ebony house because you're there? You're not, right? It's going to change you and change your politics. Trust me. He who butters your bread, watch this, an African proverb says, he who butters your bread has an effect on your stomach. So if you're taking money from these folks and you're trying to do something within their system, they're going to affect you. And it's not going to be a positive effect for African people long term. I'm playing the long game. I'm not talking about right now. I don't need their approval. I don't need their validation. We're going to build our own. I think that'll be better for us long term, not just trying to change their system from within.
All right.
What do you think about that, brother?
I absolutely agree with you, my brother. I want to be respectful of your time. How you looking? Because we got a few more questions.
We good. Go ahead. Go down. Get those questions
a brother in the comments says, how can we fight this current system of taking Black history books out of school, which is what we're facing here in Florida?
Who runs the school? That's what I ask, right? Texas was doing this, a number of years ago, and people were like, "Oh, they were up in arms. They're not going to talk about enslavement anymore. They're going to call enslaved Africans workers, whatever." I said, who runs the school? If you are in somebody else's system, then they're going to do what they want to do. They're going to do what makes them feel good. We should be doing the same thing. Take your children out of those schools. That would be my suggestion. Take your children out of those schools. There are African Center schools in Florida. I'm actually speaking next week in Florida, in DeLand, Florida, at a Black homeschooling conference. Right, come to that conference. It's February 24th, 2024. And there's so many Black people who are doing this work because of what Florida is doing. Right, but they're not going to wait for somebody else to change their mind. They're not going to try to get a law passed. Right, if you got to get a law passed in a system to teach your children how you want them to be taught, or the information you want them to have, then we're not doing the right thing. I say take your children out of those schools. Let Florida do what they do. Again, Baba, we need some people to work within that system and work on the laws and all that kind of stuff. But laws are not going to change behavior. Even if you get your Black schools, your Black books into those schools. Yes? Who's going to teach those Black books? You have a lot of African-American teachers who don't want nothing to do with African-American history. Then you have and the vast majority of teachers are who? White women. You're going to have those white women teaching your children about your culture? How good of a class is that going to be coming from those folks? Think about that. Take your children out of those schools. It's time for us to stand up.
Oh, definitely, brother. I'm strong, powerful. I want to throw up the black fist. But I do have a serious question, or really it's a comment. So when I first heard what Sawubona, and I may be saying it wrong, Sawubona.
Sawubona. Come on, man. You gotta say it like, I don't know if I'm saying it right. Some people might be like, nah, let's do Sawubona.
Sawubona.
Yes,
right?
Sir.
We see you, or I see you, right?
Yes.
I thought to myself about how our language expression is very different than the European expressions, even when we're using European language. So I won't ask you, did you understand me? I will say, did you feel me? It's something about that. Did you feel me? It's a little, it has more texture to what I'm trying to come across. It's not just a tingling of the intellect, but it is a movement of the spirit and the soul. Did you feel what I'm saying? Right. So just some thoughts on the use of this language in general, because I know you're touching on learning African languages and why that is so important.
So, when I was growing up, right, when you would say you heard me, you would say, do you feel me? You would say those kind of things in your speech, and teachers would tell you, don't say that. People would tell you that sounds like you're insecure about what you're saying. But we know as African people, it's not about being insecure. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page here, that we're on the same wavelength, we're in the same library. Do you feel me? You understand what I'm saying? You dig? Right. And so, but that is definitely a beautiful African thing. And when you learn African languages, we learn better that what African people are speaking, Ebonics or African American vernacular, the structures, the grammar, and all that kind of stuff comes from African language. study African language, and you will study the grammar of African language, and look at how African Americans speak here in America. You're dropping off syllables. You're saying I be doing this, I be. All of that stuff is very, very African at its root. We are African people. There's so many cultural retentions. We did not lose our culture. We did not lose our values. It just is. It looks different, right? But it's still there very much.
Yeah,
for
definitely.
sure.
I was telling my son about the habitual be today because when I'm in the car, I'm still speaking African American vernacular English. Really, I'm speaking New Orleans English, and
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, man, she be working my nerves." And he said, okay, so he's been in the European school and he knows
Right.
standard English. Daddy with he be or she be. I said, it's the habitual be. It
That's
means
it.
that it didn't just happen once. It happened yesterday. It happened, and it's going to happen again. It's the habitual being. We find that in not only African languages, it's found in German. So
Right.
I watched a great documentary called "Talking Black in the United States" or "Talking Black in America" that really touched on the power of actually using what we call AAVE as a teaching tool would help to help our students better understand some of the lessons that they should be learning. Moving on, I have one more question and we can get out of here. What is a rites of passage? Because you mentioned that.
Yeah.
And I recall speaking with the director of the center, Dr. Bob Wakisa, and he mentioned that they would go to the mountain, right? When they're, I don't know if they're what age, 13, 14, they would go to the mountain and maybe Zulu culture, they would have to slay a lion, but Bob is from Kenya. But whatever, they would have to do these tasks of courage, right? And then they would get circumcised. Now, my question is, what does a rites of passage look like for folk who are from an urban environment, who don't have those type of connections to the land, and it culturally different because of the urban world?
Yeah. No, I think it's something that we need to bring back. Yes, it's going to look different. So we're not slaying the warthog with our bare hands. We're not going out into the bush and stealing somebody else's cattle or something like that. But in an urban environment, it has maybe we are training our young warriors with guns. Maybe we are doing boxing and wrestling to have them deal with that physical piece and also face their fears. We're talking about who they are as a man and what to look for, in a woman. We're having those conversations, right? We're going to do simulations of this, of certain circumstances of things. Like we're gonna play war games, right? We're gonna do everything that we need to do to kind of create the kind of men that we need. We're gonna read. We're gonna study, right? We're going to learn how to learn how to cook. We're going to learn how to sew. We're going to learn how to do things that are going to help us be self-determining in many ways as an African boy, as an African woman, or whatever. I think you can do it again. We can do it in urban environments, and there are ways. I have a brother, Baba Tashango Mbili Shaka, who used to teach at Kamali Academy. Brother is a master armsman. He's a master survivalist. So, we can put our young warriors into those kind of situations. And also maybe it's just virtual in these days. Maybe they just put on the Oculus or something and be able to go through those simulations to learn these things. Some of the same things we would learn if we were back in traditional African and doing rites of passage. But we need to have that separation. So it was separation, initiation, and then you would be reincorporation into the community. So you would separate the young warriors. We can separate them. Maybe they go to a college campus. Maybe they go to a boarding school or something, in the woods still today, right? For a week, a month, and learn how to do all of these things, right? And we initiate them into our culture and our values, and then we reincorporate them into our community. And when we reincorporate them into our community, we must make it a big deal. We must celebrate them. Because if you ask a young man, you ask a man today, when do you become a man?
We don't
When do
know.
you have all kind of we'll have all kind of answers, right? We don't necessarily know when we become a man, right? But African culture teaches us that we must not leave that kind of conversation to chance, right? In our community, we must know, hey, listen, you got to do this, this, and this in order to become a man, right? Well, one of the beautiful things is as a father of a girl, you got a girl child, man. You're a
Two
girl dad.
boys. Two boys.
Two boys. All right. So, but and I'm a father of a boy as well, right? So one of the beautiful things about rites of passage is that you wanted to be able to. You were taught how to take care of a family. You were taught how to provide for yourself and provide for that family in that community. If you were not able to do that, then you were not considered a man. So if I'm looking at a brother who's going to be with my daughter, I'm asking a question: can he take care of you? Right? Maybe he doesn't need to have 70 cows, under his belt. Maybe he needs to have something. Should that be, a requirement, right? We could talk about dowries, we could talk about bride price, we could talk about all these different things, but some of those things I think need to be a requirement even today to force these young brothers to do something that they would not normally do to be a better man for our community and our people.
Absolutely. Okay. So I have one more question, brother. I'm so sorry we're over time, but this is some good stuff. And we have 30 people still watching, and they've been here the whole time, and they're leaving a lot of comments. They're kind of talking to each other. But my question is this: you posed the question about how the curriculum. If we were to design an African-centered school, what would that curriculum be? Now I know you have Kamali Academy, so I want to pose this question to you: what would the canon be? What are the books that you think that every African person, male or female, should have to engage at some point in life?
Man, that you put me on the spot because I read all the time, and there's so many great books. But the first ones that come to mind are 2000 Seasons by Aikwe Arma, The Healers by Aikwe Arma, same author. You also have The Falsification of African Consciousness. You have Zinzali by a sister in Zimbabwe. You have Blueprint for Black Power by Amos Wilson as well. You have the books of Zora Neale Hurston. You have to read Winnie Mandela's autobiography or biography. We read that joint. That was a good piece. I mean, A Long Walk to Freedom. There's so many great books, right? And one of the beautiful things about African-centered education is that you can take a child's interest and then go and find our best and brightest in that and let them read about those things as well. There's so many great books, man. I feel like I would leave out so much. I mean, I can read from a list, in front of me, but Nile Valley Contributions of Civilization by Anthony T. Browder. Even the Browder File would be good. Books by Mwalamu Baruti, 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 the Asafo book that he has Revolutionary Daily Thoughts that we use. The canon would be African proverbs from South Africa, proverbs from Kenya, proverbs from Ghana, proverbs from the continent. Those will be great for our people to really delve into. Introduction to Black Studies, The History of Africa by Molefi Asante. Those different things will be great books. And we have Toni Morrison, you have Maya Angelou, the poetry of Sonia Sanchez and Nikki Giovanni. We have so much that we could really be touching on. There's so many works in South Africa that I don't know about, in East Africa that I don't know about, right? In West Africa, North Africa that I don't know about that probably should be, on those canonical texts, our classics. You have Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. As I keep talking, more and more will come, man. The Spirit of Intimacy. The Spirit of Intimacy by Sobonfu Somé. Sobonfu Somé, last name Some. Sobonfu Somé. That is a book that I've used with young warriors in our rites of passage programs that help them understand what an African relationship looks like and the values of it. So Bon Fu Some, The Spirit of Intimacy of Water and Spirit by her once husband, Malidoma Some as well. There's so many books, man. You know what? I'll put something together. Maybe I'll put it in the comments for
Man,
folks to have for sure.
Man, absolutely. So with that being said, we have about 35, 36 people watching. If they want to reach out to Brother Baba, Dr. Samari, how can they contact you? How can they get in touch with you?
So, definitely go to kamaliacademy.com or kamaliacademystore.com. Kamali is Kamali academy.com. You can hit me up at kamaliacademy@gmail.com as well. If you'd like to email us, of course, you can go to YouTube, just search my name in YouTube or search Kamali Academy, and you'll see a number of videos that we've put out over the years, educating our folks about African-centered education.
Man, thank you, brother, so much for this. I'm going to end the live recording now. I'm sure you guys enjoyed. You guys stayed on for an hour and 20 minutes. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure Dr. appreciates it. You guys have a great one. We'll be back next week with Dr. Blair Proctor, who is a frequent visitor to the continent in South Africa, and he has the two pandemics, COVID-19. I won't mess up the brother's title, but it's going to be a phenomenal presentation. This is my brother, and he always does a great job. So I'll end the